Audience. So can we greet them and thank them once more for this beautiful panel, the first one on the answer stage? I know Nicola has to run because he's a superstar who is going to take over the next stage, but we are getting ready for the next lecture here on the answer stage. So how are you guys doing? Everything good? Everything well? Happy because you're in the Infobip Shift conference, the biggest one in Southeastern Europe? 3,000 of you this year here, so wow, thank you very much for being here. I hope you're enjoying it, getting all the information and insights you expected to have, and of course the networking, which is always on the priority list, maybe not on the first place, but that's it. Well, hello guys, hello. The chairs are off, so it's time for me to introduce to you our next speaker. He's a very creative persona. He likes beautiful content and does not give up easily. He's the co-founder of the Smashing magazine. He's the editor, author, and co-author of all the Smashing books, and of course the curator of the Smashing conferences. When he's not speaking at conferences such as this one, or of course Smashing, or a plethora of more, or writing, he's actually solving complex UX, front-end e-commerce UX, and web performance problems in small and large organizations. He says, front-end is so complicated these days. Let's take a look at what's the state of front-end in 2021. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Vitaly Friedman.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome. How are we doing, everyone? They're excited. Are you excited? Come on, people. Yeah, that's way better. That's way better. Well, who is, do we have any CSS people in the room? My people, JavaScript people? Also my people. Any marketeers in the room? Any lawyers in the room? No, well, let's see. Well, for the next half an hour or so, I really want us to take a close look at what's happening in front end, but maybe from the perspective that you might not be expecting. And that requires us to really look into this new world of adventures of what is happening. I know there have been many talks about all kinds of useful techniques and technologies, so I want to take a slightly more abstract approach and look into what do we have today, what is the state of things. And that's a messy world, really messy world. Does anybody think that developing for the web is easier today than it was 10 years ago? Please raise your hand. Who thinks it's way more complicated today than 10 years ago? Oh, so are we moving in the right direction then? If more people think it's getting more complicated? Well, it's messy, it's complicated, and it's really, really messy. So when we start looking, this is a creative process. This is how we build, this is how we design, this is how we operate in this world, right? Eventually we have a project, we start, and off we go, refining until we hit the finish line. Now normally, this is not quite what it looks like because we have boundaries. And the complexity comes from the fact that we have more and more boundaries coming in our way. There might be, you might have a very limited budget. You might have expertise in the team that requires you to be making good decisions quickly, right? You might be low on money. You might be low on time. And all these things kind of have an impact on that as well. So as we are building, as we are designing, as we are creating, every time we start, we go and we explore, right? And every time we explore, we have these dead ends where we have to recover from them to move forward, right? And this is where things get really messy and complicated because you lose a lot of time when recovering from those dead ends. Now, what am I talking about at all? I'm talking about this complexity we have. Not only do we have to make decisions, we have to make decisions across a plethora of different axes as well. Now, front-end is very fragmented, opinionated. We all have opinions about what's right and what's not. It has many different faces as well. And as it evolves, it gains these new dimensions, which I'm going to talk next, in front-end architecture, performance, maintenance, accessibility, just to name a few. Anybody is familiar with this wonderful device? Some of you did, some of you were in my workshop yesterday, right? This is a Moto G4. Moto G4 is not a particularly new device. It's been built and released in 2014, right? Anybody familiar with this device? An infamous Nokia S1, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, who would forget the Pearl Alcatel 1C, released in 2019, right? Do you know what these phones have in common? They are not good phones. They are pretty bad phones. If you compare them, right, against the performance of iPhone 7, which is at the very top here, they are 20 to 25 times slower than iPhone 7. And iPhone 7 is not the state-of-the-art device, right? So all of them perform really, really poorly. So it's not surprising that when you take a heavily optimized website, be it Airbnb, be it Amazon, or applications, it doesn't matter, it might take up to 15 to 25 seconds for a button to be clickable. If it takes 20 seconds for a button to be clickable on those kind of devices, you should not be expecting many people coming to your site, expecting to be able to use it and buy it and use it as time passes by. Because as a result of that kind of fragmentation in front end and also across hardware and devices, we ended up in this really complicated, messy spectrum of mobile. There is no mobile, there are mobiles. There is low-end mobile, there is a median mobile, there is high-end mobile, and I have a feeling that most of you are somewhere between median and high-end, right? Who wants to be in the low end, right? But if you have a phone which costs $30, you should not be expecting much. Now, I had this really strange habit that I developed over the last year. I had time, right? Every single first week of the month, of every month, I'm actually going to a couple of pages. One of them is amazon.co.uk. to see what do people buy, what are the best-selling phones. Now, some of you might be familiar with some of those phones, right? But some of those phones are, Alcatel 1C, the star, the top best-selling, one of top best-selling phones as of August 2021, which costs just around £40, which is like what, 1/15 of an iPhone? But you get only, 20 times slower phone, so it's kind of fair. More or less, right? But can you sense the difference in terms of performance to get there? And then you go maybe, to places like India, which is a different world altogether, where phones cost anything between $30 and $60, right? And then you go to Russia and have very special kind of phones. Some of them do not run Chromium, that's not surprising. And of course, if you then go to Switzerland, the world looks very different as well. And what's really important to understand here, they are really, really different. The difference in terms of performance is not even 20 times, but closer to 40 times. When we compare the single-core low-end Android and a single-core iPhone, 40 times slower. That's really significant, which is why as of 2021, we're speaking about performance inequality gap, which is why Google is pushing so hard for Moto G4, a representative device for most people. Right? And again, all these charts I was showing, all the devices, they're not like from 2019 or 18. These are the top best-selling phones as of today. So mid-tier Android devices that we usually buy today now have the single-core performance of a 2014 iPhone and the multi-core performance of a 2015 iPhone. The cheapest Android go all the way to 2012 iPhone in terms of performance. So this is why, when we look into performance, we usually look into Androids, which at least 1 year old, costs around $200. This is why Google is pushing so hard for Moto G4. But there are also things we cannot control. This is one of them. The very first thing that we do when we do performance profiling is try to understand what extensions, browser extensions, do our customer use. Because if you are unlucky to be using top 10 extensions and have them installed on your machine, it has a tremendous impact on the performance of the application, right? And we usually just leave it out of the equation. We just think about the baseline, our performance. Extensions have a tremendous impact on performance as well. For example, if you go on apple.com and you're using Dark Reader, the Dark Reader adds over 25 seconds of CPU time. Right? That's tremendous. So normally, the picture of performance doesn't look like it used to look maybe a couple of years ago. Now we need to look into this. Because in reality, this is your website or your app, but this is X, and this is LastPass, and this is Skype, and this is Evernote. And all of them, have an impact on how fast you are going to start render. And I'm not talking about Moto G4 specifically, everywhere, be it mobile or desktop. To the point that you can find now sites like this, right, which allow you to track how big of a performance impact a particular set of extensions has. So the first things you do is you ask what customers do we have, what extensions are they using, and you build a profile. So for me, this is what it looks like. We have different profiles, we have a happy customer, no extensions, no tethering, good screen, everything is perfect as it should be. But then you have an unhappy customer, unfortunately somebody with a really bad screen, really bad connectivity, and with top 10 Chrome extensions used. They're usually going to have a pretty poor connection, right? Or pretty poor performance. And we usually think that when we look into the performance side of things specifically, that technology is going to save us. You know, we've seen 4G coming in, and then 5G is here. Now, will it save all the problems we have? Well, it should be, partly, because we should be expecting tremendous impact, right? Tremendous results, tremendous improvements as well. So if we have 5G coming in, we should be expecting to be able to download one episode of Game of Thrones in 4K within 90 seconds, or the entire season in 4K in 15 minutes. That's impressive. Now, most of us probably use a mobile data plan of around 10 gigabytes, maybe a bit more than that, right? Well, we should be expecting that by the end of 2026, we'll be jumping from 10 gigabyte used monthly on a mobile phone to 50 gigabyte used monthly on a mobile phone. And that's funny, because once you start looking into how it explodes and how 5G grows, you see all these charts of 5G coming in. And this reminds you of our good old friend JavaScript, doesn't it? Because the chart is very similar for adoption of 5G and the JavaScript payload, right? So between 2011 and 2019, 4G coverage spread from 5% to 79%. At the same time, JavaScript increased by 611%. And our good old friends' third-party scripts increased by 700%. Right, that's quite surprising. So this is why when we speak about 5G, it might help us, but it probably won't. The web will be slower because of this inequality gap, right? But then there is this weird things happening in the world as well, because very often, depending on the part of the world where you are, mobile is going to be faster than Wi-Fi. So if you're targeting, let's say, specifically desktop connections, or desktop in general, you cannot rely on, on Wi-Fi being faster than mobile. In fact, in some countries, you go to Hong Kong, yes, Wi-Fi will be way faster, but then you go to Bolivia and Iran and Lebanon and Greece, well, mobile is going to be much faster. And that brings a very new series of problems. Like, for example, sometimes network or retrieving data from the network would be faster than retrieving data from the cache on your mobile device. Because your mobile devices are not optimized, or not well optimized, not optimized well enough to support that. Kind of a very new breed of problems that we actually never had before, right? And this brings us to this really strange new world where we're living in right now. And this world is defined in many ways by what we've seen last year with Google, coming in with Core Web Vitals. Anybody heard of Core Web Vitals before? Anybody tried to optimize for Core Web Vitals? Yes. Well, what we learned as well is that the Core Web Vitals, essentially page experience ranking that Google has introduced, which are supposed to have a tremendous impact on SEO, right? So if you want to rank better, you probably want to optimize for performance. And they're called Core Web Vitals, and they look like this. But what we learned very quickly, it's not like on-off. You will have a distribution of values. So you will have some countries performing better, some performing worse. So most of the time, when you're looking how well your application performs, for example, you'll be looking at a map like this. In some parts of the world, it will be better. In some other, it will be worse. That's at least the example from our case. Plus, of course, the important part that it's coming to desktop now as well. So the only thing that companies can do is think about these performance budgets. And I'm sure that many of you have been working or playing with this idea of performance budgets for a while, and that's the recommendation from, again, Google, right? Your entire application, your entire bundle, everything including the app, the framework, the router, the state management, the utilities, the critical path CSS, JavaScript, HTML, should fit within 170 kilobytes. Will it fit in your, is your Note modules folder already larger than that? Probably yes. But what's really interesting, and this is why I actually wanted to kind of share all of that, there is a plethora of companies starting doing something new, something that has never been done before, which is building components, designing components, shipping components, depending on available memory and depending on available connectivity. So if you have a slow 3G, right, and you want to support these devices, well, you have 170 kilobytes to render within 5 seconds. If you want to target 4G, well, you go to 345. And if you are enjoying the luxury of Wi-Fi, you end up with 750. And that's really complex. Like, remember in the past we were thinking maybe, the iPhone came up, so we go mobile view, tablet view, desktop view. That was it, right? You don't have to do much more than that. Now, mobile, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, tablet, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, desktop, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, right? Plus, on top of that, you have memory API that you can use to say, if it's on 3G or 4G, but it has a low memory, I'm going to serve this. And this brings us to this really new set of things that we're looking into, where every component has not only different, width, height, whatever, it has different properties. It has different experience based on the connectivity as well, which kind of brings us to this really unusual world of design engineering now, right? And it's kind of connected to design systems, of course. Anybody is working on a design system of sorts? Some of you? And design systems are not new. We've seen this before. This is a design system from the 60s for the piano comic. And the idea is simple. Well, we take everything we've got and we structure it and we formalize it and we give it names and then we can reuse it. We kind of create a vocabulary for our product, right? This is what they've been doing since the 60s, and it was working, of course, very well for them. What do we do now today on the web? Well, we're creating design systems, right? But a design system, in many ways, it's a product you have to maintain. You need people to maintain that product. And in reality, basically, what we're doing is we're crafting design languages and systems that we then use to actually create our digital products. So we're basically creating a meta product to build or design a product later. The same thing happens in front end as well, where you spend maybe, 2 days installing and setting up all the dependencies and the environment to make things, create products, right? But we've learned how to deal with this. So we know how to make it work in Sketch, and we know how to make it work in Figma, and so on and so forth, and we've been really good at it, to the point that you have sometimes design systems ops, right? Where you probably will use something like Storybook to create and maintain and test these components, right? And in fact, it's a really, really good way of actually seeing or measuring how well your system performs as well. Because you can say, let's take a look. This is what many companies have introduced recently. Design system scorecards. How good is your design system? How operable or manageable or useful is your design system? Tracking, how many duplicates do you produce? How many inconsistencies do you have? How many new pull requests there are in this new product that requires a roadmap, that requires people, that requires team, that requires governance. A design system, right? Which in the end drives us to this really quite over-engineered part that we kind of need to maintain this complexity we've got. And one of the processes to do that is called the hot potato process. Anybody heard of hot potato process? Oh, maybe a few people, right? And it's actually really quite simple. But this is probably the only way to make things work well. And that's this really mingling of designers and developers all the time. All the time. And the idea is, it's a process where ideas are passed quickly back and forth from designer to developer and back to designer, then back to developer, all the time. This looks pretty much like this at the bottom, right? We kind of have these open channels all the time between designers and developers, and you throw ideas via Slack usually, right? And you build it. And that's interesting to me, because when I think about how things used to be in the past, I would hack something around and save the file and use FTP to send it, and that would be it, right? Now, actually, if you have developers and designers, you don't need to have the mock-up to start building it, because we know what components we need, because we all create design systems anyway. You know that you will need cards, you will need accordions, you probably will need tables, you will need all kinds of things that are used all the time. So while designers are busy designing, developers go ahead and do the scaffolding, where they set up everything. They build out the things that would be then pushed, like the styles would be pushed to those components. That requires, again, the process, right? And this process can be quite complicated, but again, this is kind of just one of the ideas that Nathan Curtis has proposed. We have design system subtasks, which both designers and developers can do at the same time. And that's a very structured process. It's a very engineered process, which is why we are looking again into the world of design engineering. And step by step, it looks like this. It's actually quite straightforward. Have your discovery. We're all remote first at this point. So we're going to have Miro or Mural, where we kind of share the sketches and things like that, right? But the very first thing that these teams do, and I cannot stress or emphasize how important it is, they give things names. The very first thing you do is you sit down and you give names to components you're going to use. Because you need the absolute one-to-one mapping between the names that you have in your Figma or in your Sketch and the ones that are going to show up in React or in CSS or in JavaScript later. It's absolutely critical that you do that. It should come really one of the early steps in this process. And you do that, well, whatever you want, Google Doc, paper, whatever works for you, right? And then designers go ahead and do the designing, and developers go ahead and do developing, because they do the scaffolding of the entire application without having necessarily the design, right? And then designers go, and of course you need to think about typing and typography and space and colors and so on and so forth. It needs to be protocoled, and it's usually going to be used either using SAS, of course, where you have design tokens, or it could be also CSS custom properties. But you can see almost this gap between design and development really bridging, where designers do a bit of code and developers do a bit of design, right? Kind of going back and forth all the time, right? And so then you also have design docs potentially and versioning of components, which can happen using NPM publishing, for example. And you test it, of course, using Storybook and Figma. And you have to maintain not only the product you're building, but also the design system or design language you are building, right? Using Jira, Slack, Notion, whatever it is you want, right? And if you want to learn a bit more about this is what it would look like. There's a kind of a demo of it, or like 2-hour session where it kind of explains step by step how this process works. And this is how it works for us, right? We just set up Miro. There is a board in the middle where people can kind of have some shared space. Around it, you have these virtual tables with seats where people can sit. And then every now and again, the designer would throw an idea, the developer will reply. The designer will throw another idea, the developer will reply. The developer throws an idea, and the designers reply. Right? Kind of keeps going like this until we actually have something. But in this point, in Miro, you can do the same thing in Figma, of course, as well. And it's really interesting for me because I'm getting so excited about this for some reason. 2 years ago, before this thing, entire thing happened in our world, I was attending a conference in Prague. And I was speaking to a design lead from one of the companies in China. And she was telling me what the creative process and what the design workflow is like in China. I was shocked. Do you know what is the first question designers are being asked in China when they're getting hired? What about your machine learning skills? Right? Because how would you design if you do not have a modular system that's not only just a design system, but relies on machine learning and relies on AI? There is no notion of the design. There is a continuum of experiences different people get. And doesn't matter if it's a website or the app. And different people, based on the personalization, of course, get different experiences. So for them, it's perfectly normal to have a component not only looking small, looking large, but changing like all the time. There are families and families of components, right? And we get there as well. It's funny, because when you look into what Airbnb has been working on, they come up with this system for designers, which they call AirShots, which is a search engine. Think about it, search engine for interface designers working on Airbnb. What do? Well, you type what you're interested in, you type where you would like to preview your components, right? In which languages you would like to preview them. Hop, here we go, this is the outcome, right? I would love to see that in every organization, right? The same could be done for developers as well, right? But it gets further than that, because they went far and said, let's just apply machine learning to it as well. If a machine learning algorithm can classify a complex set of thousands of handwritten symbols, such as Chinese characters, with a high degree of accuracy, then we should be able to classify the 150 components within our system and teach a machine to recognize them. So that's what that looks like. That's how they work, right? You go, you take a piece of paper as a designer, you sketch your component on paper, you put it in front of a web camera, boom, React component. Right? Designers can go home, developers are done, that's it. So you just need to learn the vocabulary of how you sketch, and that is it, right? And then you have all the pipeline going on, the testing and so on and so forth, and you kind of move things together this way. Incredible. And this is maybe where we are actually heading, right? And I'm not talking that AI is going to replace us and all, but we can work much, much more comfortably because we have to work in the systems. There is no other way. Components are not going to go away, right? But then there is one side that actually is important, that is often dismissed, and I think I'd have to kind of spend the next 5 minutes really looking into it, because I think there's a lot about this, but there are many things that are not very clear. And that relates to privacy, right? So how did we end up in this world where looking at this, seeing this every freaking day is normal? I remember what it was like 20 years ago. Yes, I'm that old. And it was not like that. And I have a really good memory. And I have really good memory about bad companies. This is one of them. I don't know about you, but I don't like Ryanair. And I'm not afraid to say that. Why? Because of one single thing that they did, right? When you were checking out with Ryanair and you were booking flights, insurance was added in for you automatically. You can opt out from that thing, but you need to know how to opt out, because to opt out, you need to find Don't Insure Me, conveniently located between Denmark and Finland. How nice is that? And then we started moving to this world where this is normal. You want to get more Instagram clicks? You Photoshop a hair onto the ad. And people are clicking. They don't like what they see, but they click, right? And then you generate revenue. And then we ended up with this thing being misused and abused in every possible way. I've never been to watch on Facebook, but it tells me that something is waiting for me there, right? And then you get these beauties. Anybody loves them? Oh, the beauties. Where every time you go, it's like somebody just bought that and somebody just bought this, right? Well, if you look very carefully at some of them, you'll find out that what happens behind the scenes is just disrespectful to the degree which is incomprehensible, right? You just basically have a JSON file, right, that randomly, where you use JavaScript to randomly connect or combine random names with random plus names with random products, right? And you can see that because we're developers, we're magicians, we can look into view source and change things and understand things, right? And this is again normal. And then you get this, which is just remarkable, right? When YouTube was serving ads with CPU draining cryptocurrency miners, not for you, on your behalf, for somebody else, right? Would you like that? Probably not. So we decided to fight back, right? To fight back. So we use ad blocker, and I think that many of you are using an ad blocker. Who is using an ad blocker? My people, right? But then do you know that there is this war going on, a huge war going on between the ad blocker people and not ad blocker people, to the point that you have the stop ad blocking campaigns, block ad block, right? But they will never get us. We will never give in, because now there is an anti-ad block killer, right? And it just keeps going and going forever, right? That's remarkable. And we can do it better. The highlight of the year, 2021, is Stop Chat Pop-ups extensions, available for Firefox, Chrome, and any browser that you like, right? And we are even better than that, because we created things like Track This. If you want to totally screw your Facebook and Google's tracking mechanism, you go to Track This, you pick a profile you would like to become, like filthy rich, going to casinos all the time. It opens 200 tabs and clicks on all the links, so Google and Facebook and all think that you are somebody else, right? Because we don't want to give them information about us, and we want to protect our identity, right? And I get this all the time. This is what we have become in 2021, right? Pop-ups and modals, blocked. Push notifications, blocked. Chat window pop-ups, blocked. Feedback pop-ups, why don't we give us some feedback, blocked. Install app prompt, blocked. Importing context, no way. We know about LinkedIn, no way. Blocked. Geolocation permission, usually blocked. GDPR, okay. Okay, no, nothing to hide, that's okay. Turn off your ad blocker. We know how that works. We can open an incognito window, we can choose another browser, they are not going to get us. Access to camera, blocked. Access to the microphone, blocked. Video autoplay, scroll, right? We learned that as well. Email input, fake. If somebody wants my email, good luck. Good luck. I'm trying to, if it's important for me, maybe, otherwise not. This is the fun part. I have only 1 minute, sorry. But this is an important part, because I see people. I was teaching at the University of Amsterdam just before this happens. And I asked how people operate the web. Do they like the web? What is it like? People like giving fake input, right? This is so nice. If they're female, they give male. If they're 38, they give 29. If it's phone number, they give the phone number that they have, then they remove the last 3 digits and add some random characters so people cannot spam them, right? And then we have these beautiful captchas, now disguised in the form of crosswalks and fire hydrants, right? And I think it's one important thing that we really need to understand. We often think we have nothing to hide, but it's not about that. Because there is stuff to hide. And there is stuff that's called privacy, right? This was a shocking news for me, right? There is this age of menstrual surveillance where the data collected by those apps that, track periods, for example, is sold to other companies to track and to identify certain patterns. And it's not about having nothing to hide. I don't want my company to find out that I want to quit next month until I have a contract, right? I don't want them to find out about that from Instagram or LinkedIn, right? And I don't want my partner to find out that I want to propose from an Instagram ad. That's not their business, right? That's kind of the important part of it, right? And though many of you might have been in this situation, I'm really just one more minute, I promise, the phone is listening. You're speaking about Greece, and all of a sudden, next day, there is this ad about Greece on your phone. Anybody had this experience before? Oh, so many of you. And this is happening. This is happening because once we look closer, there are these triggers that actually send audio segments to Facebook and Google and so on. And don't get me wrong, I'm not this person who says just quit and go into a cave and ignore everything that exists in the world, but just be cautious about the information you share, because we don't know how it's going to be used, right? And I think this is important. Sarah Jamie Lewis wrote an article where she says, well, it's not about, again, kind of having something to hide, right? It's about day-to-day battles that we all face. Employees searching for new jobs without telling the boss, a partner considering proposing, and choosing what information to reveal. So please use a net block, and please use all these things to track them into something that isn't quite true, because we all need that. Now, just to wrap up, this is where we are today in front-end, right? We have great browser compatibility, great browser engines, great tooling, wonderful technique, wonderful technologies, Jamstack, everything is great, but we need to do a bit better in terms of accessibility, in terms of the heavy cost of JavaScript and CSS, and third parties we need to push back. Mobile fragmentation is really complicated, data consumption is growing, memory, network, and CPU limits are still limiting the experience, and then you also end up with plenty of legacy constraints and accessibility and privacy issues. So, just to wrap up, I want to leave you, really just a minute, with just a story about how things are not perfect in the world in which we're living, and that's okay, but we can try to make things a bit better. The world is unsatisfying, but we can try to improve it. That's for designers. Oh, huge thanks to Parallel Studio for the video, but everything will be fine, I promise. Cats, and meow, and thank you for listening.